Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening if you're watching this late at night. This is a very fast, quick review of Ukraine, the Holodomor. There are many big ideas. The one we're going to focus on with Ukraine is the third big idea, the one that's in bold here. The use of the term genocide to describe atrocities has political, legal, social, and cultural ramifications. And there's been a lot of debate whether the Holodomor is a genocide. Some countries have recognized it as a genocide and some countries have not. Other important ideas: economic, political, social, and cultural conditions of genocide, stability and instability. There are several ideologies that you should be aware of: communism, Stalinism, totalitarianism, Marxism, and socialism. Communism, a political theory advocating for class war and leading to a society in which all property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to abilities and needs. Stalinism, style of government, ideology, and policies adopted by Stalin based on centralization, totalitarianism, and the pursuit of communism. Totalitarianism, a system of government that is centralized and dictatorial and requires complete subservience to the state. Marxism is a social and economic political philosophy that analyzes the impact of the ruling classes on laborers, leading to uneven distribution of wealth privileges in the society. It stimulates the workers to protest the injustice. Socialism, a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. And of course, there can be democratic socialism and more or less socialism mixed with capitalism. Introduction. The countryside deteriorated badly as a consequence of the dekulakization campaign and the forced collectivization. That's from our reading from Norman Neymark on page 87. Significance. This shows the link between the forced collectivization policy and the famine. The USSR was a transcontinental country that spanned much of Eurasia. Significance. Ukraine and Russia were both included in the USSR but were treated very differently by Stalin. Bolshevik-type communism. Bolsheviks continued to insist upon a highly centralized, disciplined, and professional party. They boycotted the elections in the First State Duma in 1906. They seized power in the October Revolution in 1917. They suppressed all rival political organizations. Significance. The Bolsheviks were less interested in democracy and collaborative sharing of power. This set the stage for the rise of totalitarianism and Stalin. Who was the leader of the Bolshevik Party? Do you know? Pause and see if you can make a guess. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Lenin was the leader of the Bolshevik Party and the Bolshevik Revolution. NEP, a new economic policy of the government of the Soviet Union from 1921 to 1928, representing a temporary retreat from its previous policy of extreme centralization and doctrinaire socialism. That quote is from Britannica. Significance. This time period allows Ukraine culture and nationalism to survive. So Ukrainian culture is on the rise, and artists and philosophers and academics. This becomes a threat possibly to Stalin. Cheka, NKVD, was the first successive Soviet state security organization. It was created by decree on December 20th, 1917 by Vladimir Lenin. After 1922, the Cheka underwent a series of reorganizations and numerous successors until the creation of the KGB. Joseph Stalin, Soviet politician who led the Soviet Union from 1924 until his death in 1953. He had a policy of forcibly collectivizing the agriculture. Also, in addition to that, he wanted to increase industrial production. He consolidated his position by intensive police terror. He was a chief architect of Soviet totalitarianism. Significance. The Holodomor is considered a genocide or criminal act of Stalin's regime by some countries. Kulaks. Soviet history. A wealthy or prosperous peasant farmer generally characterized as one who owned a relatively large farm. Significance. They resisted collectivization. They wanted to keep their very large farms. The elimination of the kulaks was an integral part of collectivization. If the target is specifically only the kulaks, does that meet the definition of genocide? Why or why not, in your opinion? Okay, so again, the definition of kulaks are a wealthy farmer that owns land. Would they be considered a targeted group protected by the definition of genocide? Pause and think about how you would answer that in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, you may agree or disagree with the legal definition of genocide, and you may think there's problems with it, but this is what it is. And the protected groups are national groups, ethnic groups, racial groups, or religious groups. So that leaves a question about political groups and groups that are associated by class. However, somebody can make a counter-argument that Stalin was specifically targeting Ukrainian people, which would fall into the category of national and ethnic. Five-year plans. In the Soviet Union, the first five-year plan, implemented by Joseph Stalin, concentrated on developing heavy industry and collectivizing agriculture. Significance. This policy and plan put Stalin in conflict with the farmers who resisted collectivization. Number 13, collectivization. A policy adopted by the Soviet government pursued most intensively between 1929 and 1933 to transform traditional agriculture in the Soviet Union and reduce the economic power of the kulaks. Again, the kulaks are prosperous peasants, meaning wealthy farmers who own land. Significance. The elimination of the kulaks was an integral part of collectivization. Dekulakization. How Stalin eliminated the Ukrainian kulak class. On January 30th, 1930, the Politburo of the Central Committee of the CPSUB issued a resolution. Significance. The Holodomor is considered a genocide or criminal act of Stalin's regime by some countries. Production quotas. Part 1. Managers of state-owned firms were rewarded on the basis of their ability to meet annual quotas set by the Gauss Plan. The system of quotas and rewards created efficiency in several ways. Created inefficiency in several ways. Okay, here there's a list of ways it created inefficiency. We're going to skip that in this very fast PowerPoint. We're going to move on to the next part. In Ukraine, the production quotas for food was set too high. People were starving to death. Gulag, number 16. The Gulag was a system of Soviet labor camps accompanying detention camps and transit camps and prisons from 1920s to the mid-1950s. It housed political prisoners and criminals of the Soviet Union. At its height, the Gulag imprisoned millions of people. Remember that, millions of people. Significance. Some rich or resistant peasants from Ukraine were also part of the prisoners sent to gulags. Walter Duranty. You have extra information in your handout. Make sure you read your handout about Walter Duranty. In summary, Walter Duranty was accused of being a journalist for fake news and Soviet propaganda, specifically being Stalin's apologist, where he would write what Stalin wanted spoken about the Soviet Union. Significance. This primarily relates to the stage denial, because the Soviet Union denied the impact of the Holodomor. This also shows the significance of propaganda and misinformation. Gareth Jones. He was a wealth journalist and one of the first to expose the Holodomor. His death and murder was very suspicious. Gareth Jones died a largely discredited figure on the eve of his 30th birthday. That means he was only 29 years old, and the truth about Stalin's Holodomor only coming to light years later. However, today he is revered as a national hero in Ukraine and is honored at both Cambridge and Aberystwyth universities. Raya Kleiman, Polish-Canadian journalist. She was one of the first journalists to write about the Holodomor, making a journey by car in September 1932 through the agricultural heartland of the Soviet Union during the Holodomor. She previously spent a month traveling the Soviet far north, where she encountered Ukrainians who had fled from famine conditions in their homeland, or who had been exiled and were being ruthlessly exploited as slave labor. Term number 20, class warfare, conflict between the social or economic classes. Now this is especially between the rich and the poor, or another way of saying it is especially between the capitalist and the proletariat classes. 21, enemies of the people. This usually is a designation for political opponents rather than people who are really criminal. These people are then subjected to political repression. This term is usually used as propaganda to convince the majority that it is in their interest to repress a minority. Thomas Jefferson once said, "The two enemies of the people are criminals and government." So let us tie the second down, meaning government, with the chains of the Constitution, so the second will not become the legalized version of the first, not becoming legalized criminals. Khrushchev, Part 1. Nikita Khrushchev, leader of the Soviet Union from 1953 to 1964, his policy of de-Stalinization had widespread repercussions throughout the communist world. During the 20th Party Congress in Moscow, Khrushchev delivered his memorable secret speech about the excess of Stalin's one-man rule, attacking the late Soviet ruler's intolerance, his brutality, his abuse of power. The spectacle of the first secretary of the Communist Party exposing the wrongful executions of the Great Purge of the 1930s and the excesses of the Soviet police repression after years of fearful silence had far-reaching effects that Khrushchev himself could barely have foreseen. The resulting thaw in the Soviet Union saw the release of millions of political prisoners and rehabilitation of many thousands more who had perished. Political reform launched at the 20th Party Congress, February 1956, by the Soviet Party, First Secretary Nikita Khrushchev, that condemned the crimes committed by his predecessor, Joseph Stalin, destroyed Stalin's image as an infallible leader, and promised a return to the so-called socialist legality and Leninist principles of party rule. This caused profound shock among communists throughout the world who had been taught to admire Stalin. Review of Stalinism. Use Big Brother is watching you to help you remember this. Style of government, ideology, or policies adopted by Stalin based on centralization, totalitarianism, and the pursuit of communism. Significance. Stalinism is similar to totalitarianism in the arrest of political opposition, mass repression, fear, strong central control, and the frequent use of large prison labor camps. Thank you so much for your attention with this review video. I hope you have found this a helpful way to review. Now, of course, this is very fast, very quick. You can rewatch this and pause on various slides to get information. Also, if you have any questions, you know my email, or you can send me a chat on Microsoft Teams. Don't forget, you can like and subscribe and see more videos on my YouTube channel about other topics. Now, don't forget, because this is fast, you can pause and rewatch. All right, thank you. Bye for now.